From the outside, our life looked curated, as if someone arranged us on a shelf in a good light and said, "Perfect, don't touch." The mugs lined up by the window were all white, identical, turned so the handles faced the same way. The sheets were stretched so smooth they could refuse even a wrinkle. Our photos hung at eye level, catching the kind of smiles that belong to people who never raise their voices and never run out of patience. On weekends, we baked careful pies, fanning the apple slices like petals, plating them as if sweetness could be measured with a ruler. People liked those pictures. Hearts, comments, the polite chorus of "what a beautiful couple." The public proof of happiness felt like a receipt I could fold and keep, something to show myself on the days when the house felt colder than it should. I became good at preemptive smiling. It worked like a draft stopper under a door. Keep the air still, keep the temperature right, keep the questions from blowing in. When he looked at me, he liked order. The calm face, the tidy counter, the yes that arrived on time and didn't ask for anything back. In that order, I began to blur into the room. I was not a woman. I was a shade of paint, eggshell, durable, flattering in photos, from a distance, through a phone screen, everything held together. The algorithm loved our daylight, our polished wood, my rose peach lipstick, his gentle hand at my elbow. But between the frames ran another timeline, an evening list of tomorrow's answers, so I wouldn't fumble when asked where I'd been and why it took that long. A transparent folder of receipts, not for accounting, but for permission. Proof that nothing I bought was careless, nothing I did was unapproved. "Let me know if you're delayed," he'd say, a request snugly wrapped in concern, and I'd nod because the ribbon was soft and matched the paper. Concern doesn't leave marks. It only narrows the door 1 inch at a time. We talked about things rationally. He liked that word, so clean it cut. Rational. No emotions, no excess, no mess. If I was tired, I should identify the source, duration, and impact and present a plan for mitigation. If I wanted to see a friend, I needed to show that it wouldn't dent the budget, shift the schedule, or alter the image we carried like a spotless plate. When those conversations ended, I often thanked him for clarity and washed an already clean sink, circling the cloth over steel, polishing a silver certainty. In this house, safety belonged to objects, because objects always stayed where they were put. I, on the other hand, learned to place myself where I could not be seen. Guests adored the house. "It's like a magazine," they'd say, and I'd pour tea into thick mugs that kept the heat and the secrets in. "You're lucky to have each other," someone would add, and I'd smile carefully, the kind that doesn't bruise a sentence. My laughter, when it came, was low and brief. Loudness felt like a risk, the way a glass sometimes sounds too bright when it meets the counter. Confessions have no place among folded napkins. The napkins ask you to keep your fingers clean. Still, one evening, dusting our best frame, a beach shot, sunset caught in our teeth, my nail caught a hairline scratch in the glass. You couldn't see it straight on. You had to tilt your attention, squint a little. The faintest sound rose under my fingertip, like a note from inside a shell, a break in something small but load-bearing. I stood there, holding that almost sound, and knew I had heard the beginning of the end long before I could name it. The cold didn't arrive like winter. It seeped in like a draft no one admits to feeling. He called it structure. Structure was our morning, the calendar laid out with the tenderness some people reserve for prayers. Wake times, commute times, meal times, moments penciled in for rest, which meant silence, not softness. He kept the budget on a shared app, the kind that color codes your choices into virtue and mistake. When a number went orange, we had a talk. When it went red, We had a lesson. Lessons were not loud. They were tidy, like our drawers. I thought, at first, that predictability might soothe me, the way a metronome calms shaking hands. But the beat was his, always his. Tap, 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 until my own rhythm felt like an error to be corrected. Text me when you arrive, he'd say, and I would. Send a photo of the receipt, and I did. Share your calendar, and I opened it, the way one opens a window for inspection. Look, nothing hidden, nothing drifting. He made it sound like care. We're a team. Transparency keeps us safe. And I nodded, because care has that soft surface people compliment in living room rugs. You don't see the nails under the floor. You only trip on them. I began dividing my face into expressions that passed inspection. If I was quiet, it should be focused. If I was sad, it should be tired. If I was angry, no, there was no category for angry in our house. Anger was a spill, and spills belonged to children and careless guests. He didn't yell. I think that mattered to me for a long time, the way someone clings to technicalities while ignoring the headline. He observed. He noticed patterns. It's a frightening thing to be observed without being seen. Observations arrived as inventories. How many minutes I'd spoken at dinner. How many times I checked my phone. The exact count of almonds I ate after 10. He kept numbers like other men keep promises. When I pushed back, softly, cautiously, putting the words down like coasters to prevent rings, he'd smile with a kind of patient pride. You're more emotional lately, he'd say, the way someone remarks on weather. Then he'd suggest a walk, a breathing exercise, a budgeting tweak. There's a breed of cruelty that wears a wellness robe. It speaks of alignment, of efficiency, of shared goals. Until your insides are so groomed, you can't find a place where a wild thing might live. On those evenings, I did the only feral thing I could think of. I stared out the kitchen window and counted the buses by route number, as if proof of a world on timetables could comfort the part of me that was vanishing by schedule. He liked to hold my phone sometimes. Not suspiciously, he'd say, just curious. The word curled at the edges when he said it. Curiosity keeps couples close. He laughed. I handed it over. He scrolled with the same neatness he brought to everything, and when he found nothing wrong, he kissed my temple and thanked me for being consistent. Consistency had become my compliment, my certificate of good behavior, my loyalty card punched to the very last square. Later, in bed, he'd turn off the lamp with that careful click I built a life around, and I would lie awake listening to the quiet, which had become a creature with its own hunger. The quiet ate my words first, then it ate my wanting. That was the temperature of our home, mild enough to pass, cold enough to keep. If you had asked me then what I needed, I might have said permission to make a sound. Not a scream, not even a laugh. Just the sound a person makes when she remembers she has a name. It started with the routes I was allowed to take. First as suggestions, then as expectations, then as the only paths that didn't cause a conversation that lasted longer than the walk itself. The apartment didn't change its square footage, but it learned new tricks. The hallway became a corridor where footsteps were counted, the kitchen a testing room where my answers had to come out clean. I began to time my movements, to make the kettle and my pulse boil on separate schedules. I didn't shut doors. Doors shut me. He called it keeping things simple, and simplicity did what complexity never could. It pinned me neatly to a board labeled home. Friends became names in a drawer I opened less and less. Visits required a reason that sounded like a receipt. Even my hobbies went quiet, as if the books had agreed to stop asking for my eyes. I thought I was adapting, but adaptation is only freedom's disguise when you're running out of exits. I caught myself measuring afternoons by when he'd be back, rehearsing the temperature of my voice so it would match the thermostat he preferred. Silence settled into the corners like dust you stop trying to wipe away. Prison doesn't always have bars. Sometimes it has a perfectly working lock that you stop testing, a window you stop opening because the air outside might smell like a life, and the life might remember your name. It began at the office coffee machine, the kind that takes too long and forces strangers into patience together. He asked about the slim paperback in my hand, and I heard my own voice, steady as it said the title, like a door I'd forgotten was unlocked. His attention wasn't flattery. It was recognition, the rare kind that doesn't rush to fix or measure you. When I returned to my desk, the glass wall reflected me a fraction taller than I remembered. We spoke again later about nothing urgent, a line from a poem he half recalled, a street where the jacarandas drop purple confetti in spring, the way rain can tuck a city in. That night, while drying a pot, I caught myself smiling with my back turned to the room. I rinsed the smile off like soap and put it away with the plates. The first message was a photo he sent of a puddle on a cracked sidewalk, street lights trembling in it like a nervous heartbeat. I answered with a joke about the city forgetting to close the sky, and the ease of it loosened something behind my ribs. We traded fragments, the elevator's bad jazz, a crooked cloud, a sentence that tasted right on the tongue. Nothing was asked of me but presence. No budget, no logistics, no moral of the day. He didn't correct my words. He welcomed them. The freedom felt dangerous only because my days split along a seam I could feel with my fingers. At home, I kept the metronome. At work, and in the quiet spaces between, I found a pulse that was mine. Texts arrived like small lights. A thought on the 8:12 train. A photo of afternoon sun falling in bars across a stairwell. His, "How are you?" That meant no performance necessary. I told myself it was just air, oxygen returning to a room. But air is life. And I began to arrange my steps around where I could breathe. It wasn't the plan I'd made for my life. It was the one that kept me alive in it. 3 years teaches you how to look one way and walk another. I became precise with time, careful with tone, fluent in the language of fine. I loved in the margins, lunchtime benches, train platforms, a doorway where I could watch rain without narrating it for someone else. Guilt lived in my pocket like a smooth stone I rubbed when I needed to stay real. Fear lived by the door, reminding me to listen for steps in the hall. Between them, there was still a small meadow where I could lie down and name the shapes of clouds. He noticed before he accused. My routes shifted once a week. My phone began to rest face down, a habit I hadn't rehearsed. The new lipstick shade had no label he could file, and that alone made it suspect. "Are we consistent?" he asked, like a manager asking a spreadsheet why it deviated. I answered with careful truths that sounded like compliance. At night, when he kissed my cheek, I felt him measuring the distance between skin and secret. The way a surveyor calculates land he intends to own, I felt the watch before I found the watcher. It was a metallic taste, a prickle, a choreographed coincidence of sightings. Later, I would learn words like investigator, logs, timestamps. But first, I learned the new geometry of my days. Fewer diagonals, more straight lines, corners taken with my breath held. He called it clarity. It felt like a tightening net. I lived smaller, not by choice, but by design I hadn't drawn. He laid the papers out with the ceremony of someone setting a table. Printouts, circles, arrows, my words cut from the context that gave them their blood. Shame is heat with no light. It filled the room until I could barely see him. He spoke of vows and betrayal, and I stood inside a truth that didn't cancel his harm. I had crossed a line. He had built a cage. Both were real. Only one explained why I had learned to whisper my own name. He didn't need to raise his voice. He raised the rules. Bag cards paused for reflection. Calendar blocks named recovery time. Outings reframed as destabilizing. He praised me for cooperating, like a teacher handing back a paper with no grade, only a note that said, "Try harder." I watched my world get administratively smaller, labeled with words that When I asked for breathing room, he offered supervision. When I asked for trust, he gave me checklists. He said, "We will come out stronger." And I understood that we meant the version of us that fit his blueprint. I learned a new technique for survival. Count to 10, then count again. It happened so quickly, my body remembered it in stills, not film. His hand clamping my arm, the door frame catching my shoulder, the air leaving me as if someone opened a window in my chest. Afterwards, he smoothed his voice over me like polish, and for a moment I felt like furniture, scuffed, then buffed, never asked if I hurt. I won't describe more. I keep my dignity where he can't touch it. That night, I slept in clothes with my shoes beside the bed. As if readiness could be a blanket. He gathered my documents with a gentleness that made me sick. Passport for safekeeping, keys until things settle, cards to protect us from impulse. Each item leaving my hands felt like a small winter. Paper has such quiet power. You don't hear the door it closes until you try the handle. I learned the geography of dependence. Who could sign for me? Who could vouch for me? Who could call on my behalf when a system asked for proof I was still a person? He called it trust. I called it a vault with my name scratched on the outside. Escape is arithmetic. I timed the floorboards, mapped the quiet, counted cash folded into the hem of an old coat. I slid the window latch with the careful patience I'd practiced on cabinet doors for years, and the night air hit my face like a first honest answer. I dropped into the dark ungracefully and didn't care. Freedom isn't pretty at the beginning. It's fast, cold, and louder than you expect. My friend's kitchen smelled like garlic and soap and a life lived out loud. She pressed a towel to my cheek, not asking for a thesis, just the truth I could carry between breaths. "Stay," she said, and the word cracked like ice in warm water. I wasn't safe yet, but I was witnessed. Sometimes that's the first lock that opens, from the inside. We went to the police because she held my hand toward the door I had been circling for days. The room was bright and clinical. My story had to learn to fit into boxes with names like statement, evidence, incident. I answered what I could and refused what I couldn't. My voice steady the way a bridge is steady when it's built to sway. Filling forms felt like stitching skin, tedious, painful, necessary. I signed my name, and for the first time in a long time, the ink looked like it belonged to me. He sat 3 chairs away at the police station, performing calm like a man who had rehearsed it for an audience he respected. He didn't look at me. He looked around me, the way you look at a window to avoid the person reflected in it. When our eyes finally met, I saw the practice script. The patient, reasonable husband who believes in process, the man betrayed but dignified. I felt small and exact at the same time, like a pin on a map. A woman in uniform asked us to wait separately, and the room exhaled. I kept my hands on my knees so they wouldn't learn how to shake. Word traveled without needing mouths. At work, conversations quieted when I entered, then picked up with the delicate cadence of people rearranging furniture in their heads. Online, strangers solved me in the comments like a math problem they were proud to get right. Careless, dramatic, unwell, the kind of woman who invites trouble and then calls it by its first name. The second wound is public. It doesn't bleed. It echoes. I learned to mute entire rooms. I learned that surviving requires a privacy you sometimes have to build with both hands while people watch. Court reduced our life to exhibits and objections. My messages became ink without air. His routines became narratives with angles. Dates took on sharp edges, and even tenderness could be weaponized when read by a stranger who didn't know how my voice sounds when I'm safe. I dressed in quiet colors and spoke in steady sentences, and somewhere between a question and an answer, I felt the floor under me hold. It wasn't mercy. It was balance returning molecule by molecule. There is a tired that no sleep cures, the kind that comes from being interpreted out loud. When they read my words back to me in a tone that didn't belong to my life, I wanted to apologize to the woman I had been for writing without imagining a courtroom. I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth and counted my breaths, the way my friend taught me, in for 4, out for 6. I almost believed the worst stories about myself because they came printed and stapled and carried by people in suits. Almost. Then I remembered the window and the night that held me up when the floor did not. I said the thing I had promised never to say, not in images, not in pain spectacle, just the order of events that a room like this understands. The pregnancy, the loss, and the violence that pressed itself between them. I watched the air change the way it changes before rain. Some silences punish. This one made space. I stood inside it and did not justify my grief. I named it, and the room listened. Proof arrived in pieces, not poetry. Medical records with dates that didn't flinch. Late-night texts to a friend I trusted. Building logs, a neighbor's brief note that turned out to be a lighthouse. Each shard on its own was ordinary. Together, they formed a pattern too deliberate to ignore. For the first time, I saw my private confusion rendered as a public fact. It didn't heal me, but it placed the weight where it belonged, and my hands, at last, felt lighter. I felt it before I saw it. The room's attention sliding off the baited question, why did she do this? And toward the larger, heavier one, how was she made so small inside her own life? It wasn't sympathy, it was orientation, like a compass needle finally freed from a magnet. My choices didn't vanish. They just stopped being used to launder his. People stopped calling my fear drama and started calling his methods by their names. I stood a little straighter, not because I was forgiven, but because I was no longer the only evidence that harm had happened. Orders arrived crisp and unsentimental. No contact, no approach, distance measured not in feelings, but in meters. They didn't bandage me. They marked a perimeter where I could begin to bandage myself. The law is not a hug, it is a fence. We learned to sleep with my phone on loud and my hope on low. Practical settings for a body that trusts slowly. Safety, it turns out, is partly logistics. The verdict landed with the muted thud of a book closing at the right page. Requirements, programs, time that belonged to the state instead of my fear. It wasn't triumph, it was a redistribution of weight. I could finally set mine down without feeling it would roll back onto my feet. People asked if I felt justice. I said I felt gravity again. Things stayed where they should, especially the past. The first week tasted like tap water and sun on a wooden floor. I made tea and forgot the timer, opened the window before checking the temperature, ate breakfast while it was still hot. Ordinary things returned like shy animals, curious, ready to stay if I didn't move too fast. His letter arrived folded with careful regret. Apologies strung like lights across a house that had already been condemned. He said he understood. He didn't. Understanding would have required him to leave my name out of his need. I read it once, slowly. The way you read instructions for a machine you no longer own. Then I put it away with the paperwork that proves I survived him. I did not answer, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I wanted to stop punishing myself. Reply is a kind of permission, a door held half open. I have learned to close doors gently and completely. Saying no felt like returning a borrowed coat and walking into weather I finally dressed for. The air was honest. I breathed it anyway. Healing arrived in increments. A therapist who waited for my pauses. A walk taken without a destination. A joke that made me laugh too loud and then laugh again at my own surprise. I cooked a meal I loved and didn't apologize for seconds. I wrote my name on forms that gave things back. Documents, accounts, the spare key to my own life. The signature looked like me again. At work, faces softened back into people. My friend kept the spare key in a bowl by her door and never mentioned it like a favor. Just a fact, like salt on the counter. We spoke about soup, deadlines, shoes that don't hurt, the kind of conversations that keep a person on earth. I stopped auditioning for my right to exist in rooms and started arranging flowers there. Not for show, for scent. Through lawyers, my life came back in envelopes. Passport, cards, a spare key that felt heavier than metal, like proof of personhood. I changed locks and passwords, and the house shifted temperature, not by moving furniture, but by moving fear. The walls no longer echoed his footsteps. I stood in the doorway, with my own keys in my palm, and said my full name out loud, just to hear it travel through rooms that were mine again. It sounded ordinary. Ordinary felt miraculous. One night at the kitchen table, I spoke the sentence I had been circling for months. I broke a promise. He broke a person. Both truths fit in one room. Only one carries a crime. I didn't speak it to win an argument. I spoke it to put weight where it belonged. Owning my part didn't invite punishment. It invited proportion. Shame quieted when it realized it wasn't in charge anymore. Responsibility stayed, but it took the chair that was actually its size. I am learning that love is not a ledger. It doesn't require audits, presentations, or proof of usefulness. It asks, "How are you?" and then waits long enough for an honest answer. It leaves doors open and doesn't stand behind them counting how many times you walk through. Safety is the new romance for me. A voice that doesn't sharpen when I'm slow. A hand that asks before it fixes. A home where laughter can be too loud and no one flinches. It is simpler than I imagined and more demanding in the best way because it requires me to stay. When I remember him on his knees, I don't feel victorious. I feel the math of prevention. One boundary early might have saved years. One opened window became many open doors. The image is not a trophy. It's a footnote to a chapter I no longer reread. Pity visits sometimes, light and brief, like rain on a window you don't plan your day around. I let it pass. My attention belongs to the rooms where the lights are on. I keep small safeties the way some people keep plants. Tended, not paranoid. Filters set, roots varied, people informed. It's housekeeping, not fear. I protect the quiet I fought for by making it a habit, not a hope. My doorbell rings in the real world, not just in my mind. When it does, I check, I choose, I open if I want to. Choice is the first piece of furniture I bought for this life. Morning is simple now. The kettle hums, the light moves across the floorboards, and my name fits in my mouth without catching. I open the window before I've earned it with good behavior. Air is not a reward, it's a right. I don't promise anyone anything before breakfast. I am not a showcase. I am a house with living rooms, and I keep walking through them, leaving the doors between them kindly, deliberately open.